Hello and welcome to How is Database as a Service Driving Opportunities for Innovation? Today's webinar is sponsored by Nutanix and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event. Now, before we get to today's great content, we do have a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. That Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues you might be experiencing. Now, a browser refresh will fix most audio, video, and slide advancement issues. But if that doesn't work, just let us know in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Second, in your handout section of the webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources. I'd especially like to draw your attention to the top item in the list. It's a link to a Nutanix test drive, which is a great way to get started with some of the technology you'll be hearing about today. Also in the handout section is a link to the Gorilla Guide Book Club, where you can get access to Actual Tech Media's great printed resources on technology topics. There's also a link to the ATM Events Center, which has our calendar of upcoming webcasts, megacasts, virtual summits, ecocasts, and expert series sessions. So I encourage you to access those resources now and share them with your friends and colleagues. Third, at the end of this webinar event, we will be awarding a $300 Visa gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. The official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. Finally, one of the best benefits of this event is the opportunity to ask a question of our expert presenters. So to help encourage your questions, we have a special additional prize for you. That's another Visa gift card, this one for $50 for the best question. At the end of the event, we'll look at all the questions, pick out the very best one, and contact that prize winner. And with that, let's get to today's fantastic content. It's my pleasure to introduce you to our presenter today, Jeff Kelly, who is Senior Product Marketing Manager at Nutanix. Jeff, great to have you here.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, welcome, and take it away.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining. Excited to talk to you today about how database as a service is driving opportunities for innovation. So let's just get right into it. So I'm going to take you on a little bit of a trip down memory lane first, because I think we have to understand the context a little bit before we can kind of get into how database as a service is driving opportunities for innovation. So if you think back, I don't know how many of you were around back then, but in the 1990s, early 2000s, the database landscape was pretty boring back then. We were pretty much talking about just relational databases, supporting back office applications, HR, maybe finance and accounting, those kinds of things. Nothing like the applications we have today. It was pretty staid. And in addition to that, there really weren't that many options for what database you might use in the enterprise or large company. There was Oracle, SQL Server, IBM DB2, but typically there were a few others, but typically any given organization would standardize on a single platform. So, hey, we're an Oracle shop, or we're a DB2 shop, whatever it might be. And that was the database of choice for that organization. Of course, that made the DBA job fairly straightforward. You would hire, if you were an Oracle shop, you'd hire a bunch of Oracle DBAs, and their job was to make sure the database was up and running, performing well, backup, snapshots, you name it. That's what they did, and they were really good at it. They were specialized as Oracle DBAs or SQL Server DBAs, whatever it might be. And then from a developer perspective, there was really very little choice in terms of what database they were going to use to support any given application they might be building. It was the database of choice for that organization. So again, if you're an Oracle shop, guess what, Mr. Developer or Mrs. Developer, you are going to use Oracle to support your application. So it was all pretty straightforward, dare I say a little bit boring. It wasn't the most exciting technology space in the world back then, but it did its job. It did its job well. Of course, things started to change. Let's say mid 2000s. A number of things happened. So, of course, the cloud happened. That was a big one. Amazon, as we all know, kind of invented this concept of cloud computing with AWS. And who were the first, really, I guess, power users? They were developers. They could log on to their AWS account, swipe a credit card, and get started building applications, kind of bypassing IT. Um, and so that's really who Amazon was focused on, builders, as they called them, or developers. Um, and it really empowered them to start building new and different kinds of applications. Of course, the iPhone came out around this time, the App Store, third-party apps, as well as the things that were happening at, well, Facebook is an example of one of those third-party apps. Um, but essentially, that started to change consumer expectations. They were using these new mobile apps on their phone, and then when they would go to work, they were using these really clunky old enterprise applications. And so this was starting to change consumer expectations. And of course, the big web companies in Silicon Valley, like Facebook, Twitter, Google, etc., they were pioneering these new software development practices, where they were building applications in a very quick, iterative fashion, uh, updating them based on how the apps are actually being used by their users. Based on that kind of feedback, they would add new features or maybe take away some features that weren't working well or whatever it might be. And so this really started to change consumer expectations. And of course, consumers go to work, and they also kind of started to expect better of their enterprise applications when they went to the office. Ultimately, I think companies took note of this across industries. Didn't matter, if you were an insurance company, a bank, a retailer. Pretty soon, uh, every company across industries realized they have to get better at software, at building applications, and this really elevated developers kind of to a new level of influence within the enterprise. I've got a screenshot here of The New Kingmakers by Stephen O'Grady, who's a Redmuck analyst, and I can't recommend this book enough. It's a great book that kind of talks about how, why, and how developers became so influential inside the organization. But the point here is that developers became much more important to enterprises and big companies, because now the way big companies and enterprises across industries are going to compete is with software and applications, and so they need developers who can build these kind of apps, not just the boring old back office applications that a lot of times were just kind of off the shelf software, but actually custom applications, mobile applications, web applications that customers are going to interact with and largely make decisions about who do I want to do business with. If your bank has a terrible mobile experience, you might switch banks. So it's really important for these companies to get good at software. Um, Now, we talked a minute ago about Facebook and others kind of creating these new developer modern software development practices, and these practices made their way to the enterprise, where this kind of old waterfall methodology, where you would spend 6 months to a year gathering requirements for an application, another 6 months, maybe longer, building it before you finally roll the thing out 2-3 years later, and the application now is not relevant to whatever the original business problem was that prompted building it in the first place. And now we're starting to see more agile, lean methodologies being implemented within the enterprise, where you're basically building MVPs, minimum viable products. Basically, get an application up and running so it has just enough value that it's going to help the user, and then get it into market. See how the user is interacting with it. Test, learn, iterate. Often, these 2-week sprints you're creating. So we started to see these new development processes. They were complemented by new tools to support this more kind of agile, quick iteration development process, except for databases. Databases didn't really make the trip. They were sort of left out of the party and stuck in the 90s. Basically, the way you would provision a database or request a database to be provisioned for you if you were a developer back in the 90s, early 2000s, was the same way you would do it up until very recently. Often it was a ticket-based system where you would log a request for a database that would go to some IT team or a DBA team. Could take days, weeks before you would actually get that database. Now think about if you're an application developer and your job is to quickly build new services. Perhaps you're building, perhaps you're using a microservices type architecture where your application is broken down into multiple smaller services, and you're trying to, let's say, create a new feature. a new microservice, and you need a database for that. If you've got to wait 2 or 3 weeks, that's not gonna work with a quick iteration type style of building applications. So that's really going to stifle innovation. Um, on top of that, you're also burdening IT and the DBA, so they're getting overwhelmed with requests for databases. Again, if you think about how what we talked about earlier, pretty much all companies across all industries recognize they need to use software better. So whether you're insurance or banking or telco, whatever it might be, more and more applications are being built within your organization. And guess what goes along with most applications? A database. And so now they're getting more and more requests, and it's just not a great situation for anybody. And so it's very much like it's been for the last 30 years in terms of how you would acquire, provision a database. Of course, around this time, if you think back to around, I want to say 2010, 2012, around there, we started to see this explosion of new types of databases. So we saw, a lot of non-relational databases start to emerge. The so-called NoSQL movement began at this time. So you were seeing non-relational like MongoDB and Cassandra, a lot of open source non-relational databases, as well as then and eventually even more specialized databases like graph databases. And so all of a sudden databases weren't really boring anymore, and it led to this, again, along with microservices and modern application development practices, this idea of choosing the right database for the right job. And so again, if you're a developer building an application, you might have a certain type of feature you want to build, and the best feature, the best database to support that feature might be a key value store, and so you would want to use that rather than a traditional relational database, and so on and so forth. And so now you've got not just more databases in the organization, but a larger variety. And developers want choice. They want to use these new databases. MongoDB is a great example of an open source non-relational database that really took off because of how popular it was with developers. It really had nothing to do with DBAs or IT. It was developers who loved MongoDB, and that's why it became so popular. And they want to use these databases to support their applications, which kind of creates a dilemma for DBAs. It kind of puts them in a tough spot. Because remember, a lot of these teams are not built to support multiple databases. Hey, we're an Oracle shop, for example. And so now they're being asked to support databases they might not be familiar with. And then you start to see developers respond. Sometimes they would just go to the cloud and create their own, use their own database or spin up their own database in the cloud or on their laptop. Build applications using those types of databases, shadow databases, if you will. Which is one thing when you're doing it in development, but when you need to push those to production and you need your IT team, your DBA team, your DevOps team to support that database, well, they would often run up against problems. It's like, well, sorry, we don't support MongoDB, or we don't support whatever it might be. And so this created really, this creates really a dilemma for the DBA. How do they respond? Is the question. Now, just to make things a little bit more complicated, I just mentioned the public cloud. We're seeing this hybrid multi-cloud strategy emerge really across, across industries. And what do we mean by hybrid multi-cloud? This is where we're seeing organizations, they're running applications and databases and other services in their own data centers. Sometimes they're modernizing those, which is something Nutanix helps our customers with, so that they can be more cloud-like, but they're basically running private clouds in their own data centers. They're using often one or more public clouds, so sometimes they're using AWS as well as Azure for various reasons. And then, of course, you've got co-location services, and sometimes you've got data centers, or you've got computing happening on the edge, where you might have IoT type devices out in the field somewhere. So just to make this a little bit more complicated for DBAs and IT, as well as developers, we've got we've got applications and databases running across all these different environments. So again, just to reiterate what some of the challenges are before we get into the opportunities for innovation. So for DBAs, they're getting overwhelmed again by the sheer number and variety of databases that they're being asked to support. Hey, we're an Oracle shop, and they're being asked to support MongoDB and maybe Postgres, and maybe who knows, a graph database and other types of databases. And then because of just the sheer number of applications that are being built, in these companies, which are again not traditional technology companies, these are retailers and banks. They're hiring developers. They know they have to compete with software and applications, and most applications require a database. So they're getting overwhelmed with these user requests, these developer requests. And so the DBA teams are really taxed right now. They're spending a lot of time just on the very mundane administrative tasks you need to take care of to run a database. Um, because again, you've just got so many. It's just taking up a vast amount of their time. Um, and multiple environments. They're managing databases on-prem, they're managing databases at the edge, they're managing databases in the cloud. So this is a really complex situation that DBAs find themselves in, and they're really, in many cases, overwhelmed and stretched thin. And of course, developers, they're at the mercy of DBAs and IT to some extent, waiting for days, sometimes weeks, to get a new database to support their application development. They're waiting around. Sometimes they turn to the public cloud, quote unquote, shadow database environments. And of course, they expect DBAs and IT and their DevOps teams to support these databases in production when they're ready to go to production. But often that's a hard sell and causing some friction and delayed product releases. Of course, leadership priorities are also important. These are the folks that are, managing application development teams, heads of lines of business, at a bank. Think of, the person who cares about selling more credit cards. They have to, by definition now, be very tech savvy. Sometimes they're CTOs of these business units, heads of development, that kind of thing. Obviously they need to reduce risk, cost, and complexity. That's a big part of their job. But they also have to improve productivity of their developers and DBAs because they're tasked with innovating. And so they want to make sure their developers and their DBAs, who are very expensive, that are working efficiently and working on the right things. So then we get to what database as a service. So how can this actually drive opportunities for innovation? Well, first, let's just take a step back and define what we mean by database as a service. I suspect if you asked 10 different people what it meant, you might get 10 different answers. So when we think of database as a service, we're referring to software that enables users being DBAs or IT, or others, to set up, operate, and scale databases without having to know about or really even care about the precise implementations of the specific database. So this is what we're talking about when we refer to database as a service. It doesn't refer to the specific database engine you might be running. Rather, it's a service that actually can spin up, operate, and scale your given database engine, SQL Server, Postgres, whatever it might be. So here's what you came for. How is database as a service driving opportunities for innovation? Well, one of the most important things that database as a service does is that it automates a lot of these important but often tedious administration tasks, patching, backups, cloning, things like this, where DBAs are spending a large amount of their time today because they've just got so many databases to manage. It just takes up an enormous amount of their time. So they're focused on these. Again, they're important, but they're not differentiating for the business. These tasks, these things you've got to do to make sure your database is running well, and also at least could lead to manual error. I mean, when you've got so many databases, things can fall through the cracks. And so what database as a service can help with is automating a lot of those tedious administration tasks, which does really two things. One, it's going to increase your operational consistency. And what I mean by that is you're now able to, rather than manually patching and upgrading databases, you can automate that in a way that and apply it to your entire database fleet, rather than kind of doing it in a more manual fashion where there's just room for error or perhaps different ways of doing things. And so it can add a layer of consistency across your entire fleet of databases that is very hard to get when you're managing your databases in a manual type way. Probably, well, I don't know if it's more or just as important, but very importantly, all this automation frees up DBA time to focus on higher value tasks. So this is where the innovation component comes in. So what do we mean by higher value tasks? Well, things like making sure your database architecture is following best practices. Things like optimizing for performance uh, is another important higher value tasks. Now this is good, of course, for the organization because it's helping, because it's allowing DBAs to focus on supporting their developers, their end user customers, if you will. I should say another important potential higher value task, things like certainly if you're a Postgres, if you're using Postgres, which has a lot of extensions, a very popular open source database, making those extensions available to developers, those kinds of tasks, which are actually going to impact the applications that are being built and run, that are often customer facing, revenue generating. So providing that kind of those kind of capabilities is a much higher value task than just kind of the mundane day-to-day administration tasks around your database. And really this makes the DBA more valuable as well. Now they're focused on things that are really moving the business and not just some of the back office tasks, if you will. Now another kind of the flip side and a really important aspect of database as a service is this self-service for developers. So we talked a minute ago about modern software development practices. Developers are working. I mean, you could spend hours talking about what that means, but for our purposes, developers are trying to build applications and get them out the door quickly. They're trying to learn based on how those applications are being used, what features to build next, and they're iterating very, very quickly. Now, when you're operating in that kind of model, trying to ship new features, some cases really savvy organizations are shipping features on a daily basis. Probably not all enterprises, but still, every couple of weeks. If you're waiting 2-3 weeks just to get the database to support some of these new features, that's not going to support that kind of innovation. And so, a good database as a service solution should provide a self-service capability for developers, so they can provision databases on their own without having to bother IT or DBAs, without having to log tickets, and simply with a few clicks, preferably in their development environment of choice, so kind of integrated into their environment, spin up a new database. So we're talking, days, perhaps minutes, perhaps days, rather than weeks to get your database up and running, supporting these new rapid iterative way of building applications. I shouldn't say new anymore. It's been around for a while. That's how most modern shops work. But as I said, this part is new, where databases really have been left behind uh, in terms of integrating into that model. So this is another really important way that database as a service helps organizations innovate. Choice is another important one. We talked earlier about how in the 90s it was pretty boring space, the database space. You had a couple, 2 or 3, kind of leading relational databases, and that's what you chose from. But then, of course, we saw over the last decade, this explosion of new types of databases, both certainly the non-relational NoSQL databases. Most of those were open source, but also even open source relational databases. Postgres, although not new, has become very popular in recent years as a relational database of choice in terms of the open source community. So you're seeing a larger variety of databases, and of course, developers want to use the right tool for the right job, the right database for the right job. And what database as a service can provide is that support. So a good database as a service solution supports multiple database engines. So not just Oracle or SQL Server, but also Postgres, maybe Mongo, could be other databases as well. Giving developers that choice, and also they can feel comfortable knowing that these are going to be supported in production as well. And so this allows them to, again, pick the right database for the right job, which means they're going to be able to build the applications they want to build. If they want to build a certain type of application that requires a particular database, but they can't access that database, they can't provision one, or they can't get it supported in production, that's going to stifle innovation. So this opens up choice for developers to really pick the right database for the right job to build their applications. And finally, this is really important when we talk about hybrid multi-cloud. Database as a service really should support multiple deployment models. So whether that's on-prem, public cloud, co-location, a good database as a service solution allows you to manage those databases across all those environments. And what that really does is it allows, again, this sort of relates to the previous slide around choice. You can run the right workload in the right environment, based on your costs. Sometimes it's functional requirements. So, you might want to pick a particular, you might want to run a certain application and database in one particular public cloud because they have great, machine learning services that you want to integrate into your application. You should be able to do that. You might have another application, well, based on cost and, it's, and maybe, who knows, could be regulatory requirements. We want to run that in our on-prem private cloud. You should be able to do that with a good database as a service solution and provide that similar experience for managing databases across all these environments. Now, as we kind of walk through some of these opportunities, I said a good database as a service solution should provide these things. And so, of course, not all database as a service solutions are created equal. So just kind of want to walk through, what does the landscape look like today in terms of database as a service offerings on the market? So first, kind of probably the most popular or the most well-known is the cloud vendor database as a service options. So you can think of AWS with their relational database service. Azure has a similar service where typically they do support multiple database engines, which is a good thing. However, they only run on their public cloud. So if you want to use RDS, that's great, but you can only use it on Amazon's cloud. It doesn't support on-prem, or certainly doesn't support other public clouds. And so, you can certainly get value from it running on AWS. But if you've got databases running across multiple environments, that's not going to be a huge help in terms of managing them. Then you've got the database vendor database as a service. So think of these database companies who make their particular database available as a managed service. The leading ones will make them available across clouds, so you can spin it up on AWS or Azure or GPC. But typically, it's only supporting their database, which from their perspective, of course, makes sense. But again, if you're using more than one type of database, and as we talked about a moment ago, most organizations are using multiple flavors of databases because of to allow their developers to innovate. Then this is going to provide limited value. Now, there are some multi-cloud database as a service providers out there. They tend to be relatively small providers focused on open source databases, not the proprietary commercial databases. And this is where you can run them across multiple public clouds and supports multiple databases. This is getting closer to kind of the full service database as a service solution, but again, still limited in most cases to kind of open source databases. Usually these don't support some of the more popular proprietary commercial databases. So again, limited value. And this is where we come to Nutanix and our offering, Nutanix Database Service. So we're really focused here on hybrid multi-cloud across the company, and specifically hybrid multi-cloud database as a service with our Nutanix Database Service. So with NDB, as we call it, you can run NDB on to manage your databases on premises, co-location facilities, or multiple clouds. So if you're running databases on-prem, and let's say also on AWS, you can manage both those deployments with Nutanix Database Service. And Nutanix Database Service also supports multiple database engines. And I'll get into that in a little bit more detail in a moment. So at a broad view, this is sort of what the market looks like today. It's of course evolving quickly, but this is sort of what it looks like today. Now, Nutanix Database Service supports, as I mentioned, a number of different database engines. In fact, the 5 most popular database engines. But essentially, it allows you to automate management of hundreds to thousands of databases across a hybrid multi-cloud environment. Talked about some of the challenges of administrating so many databases in a manual way, and databases kind of falling through the cracks. This helps prevent that. It's going to really enable developers to self-service their database needs. And of course, as we talked about, database administrators now can focus their time on higher value tasks. And what really sets NDB apart from some of the competing database as a service solutions on the market, as we just kind of walked through the landscape a moment ago, first and foremost, NDB supports the most popular database engines across open source and proprietary categories. So the 5 most popular databases, if you go to DB Engine's rankings, for example, are the 5 that NDB supports: PostgreSQL, MySQL, Oracle, SQL Server, and MongoDB. So you can run and manage those 5 different databases using NDB. You can manage both new and already deployed databases. This is important, a little bit nuanced, but important. For a lot of the cloud database as a service solutions, there's a pretty significant migration required. If you're running a database, for example, on the IaaS of one of the big cloud providers and you want to use one of their relational database services, you've basically got to migrate that database and spin up a new database, migrate data, etc. It's not an easy lift. With NDB, if you're running databases on Nutanix infrastructure, all we have to do is point NDB at your existing databases, and it can take over management and administration of them. So a much lower friction. Another important one is NDB allows you to retain full control of your database servers. So with the cloud providers, you're limited to the database versions and extensions that they support. And you don't really have direct access to the operating system, database versions, and things like that. With NDB, we give you that full control. You do not lose that control when you use Nutanix database service. You still have control over what operating systems you're running, what database versions you want to run. In the case of Postgres, what extensions you want to use. We allow you to have that full control while still getting the value of automation. Of course, end-to-end support from Nutanix, as well as this same experience across public cloud, on-premises, and co-location. So really simplifying the administration of databases for both DBAs as well as for developers. Same experience no matter where you're building applications and running your databases. So just to recap, we've walked through kind of where we've come from. The database space, not the most exciting space back in the 1990s. It's changed a lot more databases on the market. Obviously, software technology is playing a huge role in every company and every industry these days. And so database as a service really opens up opportunities for innovation in 4 key ways. Automation of your database administration tasks leads to operational consistency and just as important, freeing up time for higher value tasks, making sure those the database architecture is running, making sure the performance is optimized, making sure developers have access to the right databases and extensions that they need, those kinds of things. It enables developers to self-service their database needs, so it fits into this modern rapid application development style of building software that is so important today in terms of getting your software out the door fast and living up to customer expectations. It can give developers choice. Choose the right database for the right job and know that it's going to be supported in production. And of course, it supports public, private, and colos, so developers can take advantage of each of the cloud's particular strength and run their databases wherever they choose based on their requirements. Could be functional, could be regulatory, whatever it might be. So with that, I'm going to turn things back over to Scott. I hope this was useful for some folks. I'm happy to take some questions if there are any.
Yeah, sounds good, Jeff. By the way, just great presentation. As someone who was around as a technology journalist covering the old Oracle, Microsoft, IBM market share battles of the comparatively boring RDBMS days in the late 90s, I sort of appreciate this grand tour of how we got to the much more dynamic situation that we're in now. And also really appreciate that table showing like the different DBAS offerings and sort of the limitations of the different approaches. It was really clarifying. We do have some questions here. The first one is, how does NDB reduce overall costs?
Sure. Well, a few different ways. In some cases, we see customers. One of the things we see customers, an overall trend, not just our customers, but in general, what we're seeing is uh, enterprises trying to move to more open source databases, and that can be challenging. I mean, well, let me back up. So that can obviously reduce cost if you're moving from a commercial database where you're you know paying a vendor to moving to an open source database that's supported by the community. That can reduce your cost significantly. However, there are challenges in that. With an open source database, you don't have necessarily uh, enterprise support from a vendor. And what NDB can do is, by automating a lot of those tasks, take a lot of that off your plate. So rather than having to manage, uh, learn and manage a new database administration tasks, NDB can help you with those by automating them. And again, allowing DBAs to focus on higher value tasks, but essentially help kind of speed up that transition from proprietary to open source databases for those folks that want to do that. I think the other way is, Nutanix Database Service is really the only, well, let's not say only, but one of the only database as a service solutions that can run on-prem. And so what we're seeing is, if you're familiar with Andreessen Horowitz, they wrote a blog post or a paper not too long ago about the trillion-dollar paradox of the cloud, which is, at some point, running workloads in the cloud actually can become cost prohibitive, and we're actually starting to see organizations move workloads back to on-prem private clouds, private data centers. Now, that makes sense, especially if you can run your private cloud like a true cloud. And that's what NDB helps you do for databases. So you can still get that database as a service experience in your own data center, where costs can be a lot lower for some of those very large steady state workloads. When you're running those, a really large intensive database workload at a steady state in public cloud can get very expensive very fast. And so that's where we're seeing organizations look to save costs by moving back to on-prem. And then again, of course, that just kind of naturally leads to this hybrid multi-cloud environment with more complexity, which NDB is all about helping you simplify.
Gotcha. Okay, great. And before we get on to the next question, I'm just going to put a poll question up here, just about any additional information that that you'd like about NDB. So you can see the options there, and we'll leave that up there while we get into some more questions. Jeff, we've got one here from Jonathan who's asking, what's the licensing structure? Just broadly, how does it work?
Sure. Well, at a very high level, it's a subscription licensing structure. So it depends on, it could be 1 year, it could be 3 year license, but it is a subscription model. Fits in with the cloud model. It's not a traditional perpetual license. So
Okay.
subscription model, and we certainly can get you more details on what that entails following the webinar for sure.
Okay, great. Um, some people might be familiar with Nutanix's Era offering. In I understand this is the next generation of that. Is NDB sort of just a name change that gets more directly at what it is, or were there significant changes to the architecture of the product or the feature set?
Yeah. Well, essentially, it's a name change. So we here at Nutanix simplified our kind of naming structure of all our products back earlier in the year. That said, the architecture hasn't changed, but of course, just like all the organizations out there building software and iterating and adding features, we're always upgrading, improving Nutanix Database Service. But essentially, it's the same product, different name.
Gotcha. Great. Another question from M about the roadmap. So you mentioned those 5 engines that you're supporting the most popular database engines. He's wondering if there are plans to support others, or are you really kind of hitting the market with the ones that you've got?
Yeah, great question. We take our cue from customers. So, as we get more requests to support different database engines, that's certainly something we take into account. So I can't give you any specifics on, hey, we're going to support this database or that database engine, but that is definitely something that we do think about. And so yes, there is the potential for that to happen based on what our customers are looking for.
Okay, super. Well, Em, that sounds like your cue to let Jeff know what you're looking for. Um, uh, let's see. Next question here. What do you think databases were sort of left behind when modern software practices were being developed?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. I've been in this space a very long time, and I was asking this question a long time ago. We hear cloud native this and cloud native that, and we didn't hear a lot about cloud native databases. I think, partly it could be because, if you think about the kind of modern software development, how it emerged at some of the web companies, the Facebooks of the world. A lot of those types of applications are stateless applications that don't necessarily require a robust database to support it. So that might be one reason. I'm speculating, but that's kind of one of my theories. And I think from a developer perspective, developers want to focus on building software. So it's not surprising that, well, let's back up. So all these kind of new methods for building software and the related tools, many of them are open source, were developed by developers themselves, at the big web companies. And so it's not surprising that they focused on building tools that they interact with every day to actually build software. And databases are kind of they're very important, obviously, to your application, data integrity, performance, making sure your users are getting a fast response. But a lot of developers kind of just want the database to just work. They don't want to necessarily spend a lot of time with it, and that's understandable. And that's just what database as a service can help with. But I think that might be another reason it really wasn't front and center in kind of this modern software development movement. I think it's starting to change. People recognize the importance of databases. And that's why you're seeing database as a service as a category become much more popular, and certainly why we're seeing a lot of interest here at Nutanix for Nutanix database service.
Gotcha. Great. Another question here from Jonathan asking about, with the hybrid approach, so an on-prem app connecting to a cloud database as a service, how is latency and network connectivity addressed? It means, any concerns with leveraging DBAS with on-prem apps?
Yeah, well, that's interesting because with NDB, unlike some competing solutions, you can run your application and your database side by side wherever you choose, and still get the benefits of automation and developer self-service that NDB provides. So if you're running, if you want to run your database on-prem, for example, and you want to, and let's say you were also an AWS user, and you said, well, I'd love to use RDS to support this application that is running on-prem, and it's running there for a reason. We want it there. We don't want to run it in the cloud, but we do want to take advantage of a database as a service. Well, using one of the big cloud providers would be challenging. You could do it, but there would be latency concerns potentially. So with Nutanix Database Service, you can get that experience on-prem. So you can run your database and your applications side by side in the same environment, and still get a database as a service experience across all those environments. And so that's, I think, one of the big benefits that NDB provides, that on-prem experience that's the same as the cloud, and therefore you have complete choice of where you want to run your applications and databases without having to worry about that kind of latency issue.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Hey, there's a question here about what you're seeing as far as customers moving toward private cloud, and I guess I'd like to expand that question a little bit if you don't mind, which is, what are some of the top use cases that you see as far as how your customers are using NDB? Like, what are like sort of the most common ways that they're using engines and cloud versus hybrid? Are there some top use cases, or is it really so because of the flexibility, it's all over the map, and it's hard to say something like that?
Yeah. Well, if you mean by use case, like what type of applications of the databases that are being managed by NDB supporting, yeah, I mean that's all over the map. And so we're working with some of the big retailers, for example, who who are supporting their customer-facing mobile applications. They need databases to support those where their customer data, transaction data is stored and processed. And so they're managing those databases that are supporting those customer-facing applications using NDB. In some cases, they're also internal applications. I mentioned, we talked a little bit earlier about um, this idea of, when these modern mobile applications started to become popular and consumer expectations changed. They want to go into work and they want a similar experience. They don't want to use these clunky old enterprise applications. So a lot of customers are also building internal applications that are much more consumer-like. And again, using different types of databases to support those, and NDB can manage all of those. So it really runs the gamut in terms of the types of applications that the databases NDB manages are supporting. The reasons generally customers come to us for one of two reasons. One is that they want to get better at building software faster. They want to enable their developers, and the database is a bottleneck. And so NDB is a solution that can help relieve that bottleneck by providing that developer self-service capability. And of course, the flip side is they're coming to us because they say, hey, our DBA team is stretched to the limit. But we're showing no signs of slowing down. We're going to have more databases. How do we help our DBAs be more efficient and actually free them up to work on things that matter to the business? And that's the other big thing that we hear from customers who are coming looking for more information and potentially deploying NDB.
Gotcha. Okay. Um, and I just want to thank everybody who's answered the poll. This question that's very helpful. It looks like we're coming up on time, Jeff. This is probably a good place to leave it. But if somebody wants to get started with Nutanix or find out more, what do you recommend as far as next steps?
Yeah, definitely head on over to nutanix.com and /NDB, and you can use our test drive service really to take just that, take a test drive of Nutanix database service. It kind of walks you through all the major things you might do with a database, provisioning, patching, snapshots. You can kind of get a sense of what that's like using Nutanix database service. And of course, you can, we've got a lot of resources on our website you can check out and reach out to us. We're always eager to talk to new folks who are looking to kind of modernize the way they manage and run their databases.
All right, super. Well, Jeff, great presentation. Appreciate all your insights in the Q&A here as well. And really appreciate your time today. Thanks for bringing us up to speed on
Yeah, it was
NDB.
fun. Absolutely. Thanks, everyone.
All right, and finally, it's time for the $300 Visa gift card prize drawing, and the winner of the gift card today is Fernando Jacinto from Texas. So congratulations to Fernando. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Nutanix for making this event possible. And thanks as always for attending and for your great questions. That concludes today's event. Have a great rest of your day and a great weekend.